Coming up, it's been one of Nick Saban's most strongly held opinions as of late, but there's a chance it was wrong. Plus, there is a coaching rumor in the SEC that's pretty juicy that simply won't go away. It's all on the way next on SEC Country Live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to SEC Country Live. I'm Brandon Adams. Happy to have you with us as we take a look at everything happening around the Southeastern Conference today, heading towards another busy weekend of football. We'll do that from a point spread perspective coming up in just a few minutes' time. We'll say hello to David Wasson from BetUS and get his perspective on the big edge for some of the big games on Saturday. Plus, we'll hear a lot from the league's top coaches as I said before, we head towards another fascinating weekend. Let me begin with this, though. Let's go back to March with Alabama coach Nick Saban. And one of the things that Saban has been quite proud of is his willingness to adapt and change. And I think Saban would say in this winter of his career, that some of his late career success is really owed to the fact that he was willing to start doing things differently than he did them in the past. There was an ESPN.com article a few weeks ago where he credited Lane Kiffin for helping this evolution occur for him, just doing things way different, and so proud of himself for being an old dog late in his career, willing to learn some new tricks. There's an important consideration that I think needs to go on for what Nick Saban said in the past. But first, let's give you a reminder of exactly what Nick Saban did have to say. This is the Alabama coach going back to March.
The game is different now. People score fast. I grew up with the idea that you play good defense, you run the ball, you control vertical field position on special teams, and you're going to win. Whoever rushes the ball the most for the most yards is going to win the game. You're not going to win anything now doing that. Because the way the spread is, the way the rules are to run RPOs, the way the rules are that you can block downfield and throw the ball behind the line of scrimmage, those rules have changed college football. All right, and no huddle fastball has changed college football. So I changed my philosophy about 5 or 6 years ago. All right, and it was more than that. When Lane came here, we said we got to outscore him.
So that's Nick Saban. He's so proud of himself for how much he changed. He's credited Lane Kiffin for helping him do that. And he was just so sure that you're not going to win anything in 2021 playing good defense and running the football anymore. That's not going to get the job done, Nick Saban said in March of this year about this upcoming season and all the recent seasons that we've been in as of late. Let me ask you a question. What if what Nick Saban said right there just simply wasn't true? And what if some of his former assistants right now are the ones that are helping prove that what Nick Saban said simply wasn't true? Think for a moment here about the two guys that are in probably the closest proximity to the level of success that Alabama is enjoying. Obviously, Jimbo Fisher, who earlier this season became the first former Saban assistant to get a win against his old boss when A&M knocked off Alabama. But also think about Georgia, who's currently the number one rated team in the College Football Playoff Top 25, which was re-released yesterday. Is it fair to ask the question about whether or not the success that A&M is currently enjoying, they have a chance of winning the SEC West if Auburn could upset Alabama at the end of the season, and certainly the success that Georgia's enjoying, where it's obviously being led by its defense and a probably better than you realize offense, but the fact that both these teams are quite content, A&M and Georgia, quite content to be physical, quite content to play defense, quite content to run the football. A little bit okay with not quite having as much finesse-style throwing the football offensive play as what maybe Alabama came to be defined by in recent years. The fact that Jimbo is having as much success as he is, the fact that Kirby's having as much success as he is right now, does that potentially make what Nick Saban said back in March wrong? Now, obviously, the recent seasons of college football seem to argue for Nick Saban on this. I mean, after all, Clemson won a national championship in 2018. They averaged more than 40-plus points per game on the way of doing that. Had a quarterback in Trevor Lawrence who would eventually become a number one overall pick and has been commonly mentioned among the best quarterbacks in recent college football history. Same thing for LSU in 2019. They averaged nearly 50 points per game. Obviously, Joe Burrow also became a number one overall pick. Joe Brady, the passing game coordinator, he, was dialing it up and doing big things each and every Saturday for the LSU Tigers. Alabama a year ago, once again, the same kind of thing. It's Steve Sarkisian running the offense, and you're scoring 50 points per game. And, boy, everything that Saban says he learned about football in recent years, the last few years of college football would seem to argue for that being absolutely true. But is it also potentially true that what creates the explosive offense in college football, what allows you to dominate in an individual season, also potentially has the potential of being a fire that burns out very quickly? I mean, after all, Trevor Lawrence is not at Clemson anymore. Really quality, great, number one overall pick type quarterbacks, they leave. When they have a chance after their junior year, they're going on to the NFL. And what Clemson has found out is, in the post-Trevor Lawrence world, replacing that kind of productivity at quarterback has turned out not to be a very easy thing to do. And suddenly, the great explosive offense that led Clemson to a national championship in 2018 here in 2021 sort of doesn't really look like that kind of thing has as much staying power. And if that was true for Clemson in 2018, even more so for LSU in 2019. After all, LSU, I believe, goes on the list of greatest SEC teams of all time. And certainly in recent SEC history, no one's been better than LSU was in 2019. But Joe Burrow left. He's with the Cincinnati Bengals. Joe Brady left. He's the play caller for the Carolina Panthers. And in their wake, there's not much left at LSU that reminds you of what existed there in 2019. Frankly, the same thing could kind of be said for Alabama here this year. Now, Alabama is still very much a national championship contender in 2021. No one disputes that. But does any Alabama fan dispute that right now Bama offensively is not what it was with Steve Sarkisian at the helm? Because once again, if you've got the great coordinator and if you're producing the kind of offense that Nick Saban just said was required to win in this current age in which we're living, the problem is with that kind of play caller, you're not going to keep him very long. You may outsource half your program to somebody else, but what happens when that guy leaves? And those guys will always eventually leave. They're just simply going to get a better offer to go somewhere else. They're going to get a promotion. They're going to be a head coach. They're going to get some of what goes on with that. That's just what's going to happen. What happens in the aftermath of that? Is there any Alabama fan that right now would say that Bill O'Brien, as a replacement for Steve Sarkisian, has been Sarkisian's equal as a play caller? Now, the overall numbers for Alabama aren't bad, but they're also not great, at least in comparison to the historic highs that Bama's been on in recent seasons. Say the same thing about Doug Marrone, also a former NFL head coach, brought in to run the offensive line. Is the brain trust of Marrone and O'Brien working together, is that creating for Alabama right now the same kind of offensive results it's gotten in recent seasons? Just use your own eyes as a judge. Watch last Saturday's game against LSU. So I think there's a chance that what Saban said he saw happening in college football might have been working in those years, but for the programs that sold their soul, that traded their physicality to get the kind of finesse-based offensive explosiveness that it took to win those national championships, there is no free lunch. You always have some sort of trade-off on the other side of that, and for a lot of these teams, what they found out is the trade-off was going to be simply not enough staying power to remain consistent at the high level of offensive performance you once had. Let me give you a stat that backs this up. I mentioned before one of those former Saban assistants like Kirby Smart. Smart has seemed to be the slowest coach in the SEC to figure out what Nick Saban says that he knows full well, that you're not going to win anymore with elite defense and running the football. You've got to have the elite offense. Well, guess what? Here we are in 2021. And guess what's happening? If you take a look at the SEC stats right now, what you'll see is a Georgia team very content to play defense, a Georgia team that still wants to run the football, a Georgia team that's not making a superstar household name out of its quarterback. Guess what it's doing right now? It's averaging more yards per play offensively than Alabama is. Georgia, believe it or not, is actually the number one team in the SEC right now when it comes to yards per play offensively. Alabama just number two. So suddenly, Nick Saban's revelation that offensive football is the way to go, boy, it seems like that once the guys in which you outsource that responsibility to are gone, and eventually quarterbacks, play callers, they'll all leave, all of a sudden replicating that success has turned out not to be quite so easy. Now, we don't quite yet know how the rest of the season is going to resolve itself. We don't quite know how that's going to play out as of yet. Hard not to notice right now, though, places like Texas A&M, places like Georgia. These are programs content to embrace the physicality that Nick Saban has recently shunned. And right now, what's happening in College Station and what's happening in Athens make that seem like a pretty good decision. Welcome in, everybody, to SEC Country Live. I am Brandon Adams. We have a lot that we're going to hit over the course of our time here together today. A bunch of big rumors and reports and previews of the upcoming games around the SEC. In fact, coming up in a moment, Speaking of Alabama, what are the chances that a guy like Will Anderson, the outstanding pass rusher from the Crimson Tide, could win the Heisman Trophy? We'll talk about that. Plus, we'll also talk about Georgia's version of that and Jordan Davis, the defensive tackle, who's trying to do the same thing. We'll talk about why in 2021 that may be more possible than ever when it comes to the race for the Heisman Trophy. Plus, we'll take a lot of your comments on both Facebook and YouTube. All of that is coming up. But for now, though, let's go ahead and get ready to speak to David Wasson here from BetUS. It's our time this week to get a chance to talk with him about the upcoming games around the SEC, big spreads to break down, big games to look at, including, speaking of Texas A&M, kind of a marquee game on Saturday in Oxford, Mississippi, as Ole Miss hosts Texas A&M. I think this is a pretty fun one to get into, so we'll do a lot of that with our buddy David Wasson from BetUS here coming up in just a little bit. So that should be a great time and a lot of fun all the way around. And I'll remind you that BetUS also has a tremendous initial sign-up bonus for you. When you get signed up for an account there at BetUS, they got a big deal for you that you can take advantage of that literally makes you a winner before you place your first bet. So good stuff with David Wasson coming up on all of that. Also, we'll look at the aftermath of what happened last week at Florida. Assistant coaches are out. Former coaches are being critical. What's the future hold for Dan Mullen? We'll deal with all of that. But for now, as promised, let's get ready to go around the SEC, the big games from a point spread perspective. Our friend David Wasson from BetUS. Then you put in $100, they're going to put in $125. They're putting 125% more in your account when you get going there. So check that out. BetUS.com. Use the promo code SEC125 and take advantage of the great savings there. So David's ready to go. David, welcome in to SEC Country Live here today. We certainly appreciate your time and hope you're doing well.
Always a pleasure, guys. This is the best part of the year. Anytime I can talk football with you guys, it's a great situation.
No doubt about that. And, of course, a lot of our folks taking advantage of that great offer there from BetUS there as well, and that's always a great thing to be able to do, too. Let's start with Georgia going on the road to Tennessee. Tennessee, a 20-point underdog, and at times this year against that kind of number, Tennessee hasn't exactly fared well. Eventually missed the cover against Alabama a couple of weeks ago, failed to cover a 19-point number as an underdog against Florida earlier than that, but there is still some chatter about the Vols. Got the win against Kentucky this past week. Obviously explosive offensively to do so, had the football for less than 15 minutes, but still scored more than 40-plus points to go out there and win that game. So certainly impressive offensively a moment ago. Is that explosive offense from Tennessee enough in your mind to give Tennessee a chance to keep it underneath this 20-point number as a home underdog on Saturday?
No is the answer to the question. How do you like that for a 6-6 answer?
I like
no
that.
is the answer to the question. If it was 21.5, I'd be more intrigued by it. But at 20, I think that little bit of difference makes a whole lot of difference. Obviously, it's less than 3 touchdowns. Tennessee is the kind of team they're below 500 against the spread this season at 4-5. Get this, they're also 11-23 in their last 34 home games at Neyland Stadium. That's an awful number against the spread. Also 1-4 in their last 5 as a home underdog. So while they played well last week against Kentucky, that almost looks like more of an aberration, especially when you factor in how poorly they play at home. They're 1-5 in their last 6, also after a straight-up win. You know, that really is kind of a nebulous stat. Georgia's also 4-1 against the spread in the last 5 in this series. Georgia's just so good. Their offense is just clicking so well. The defense is playing so well. This is Georgia's time to shine. I think they cover with ease on Saturday afternoon.
Another game in the SEC that I find to be pretty fascinating on Saturday, and it's a little bit of kind of, I guess, contrary trends here a little bit with Mississippi State going to Auburn. You know, Mississippi State got the cover last week against Arkansas. They've actually covered, I think, 4 straight on the road here, and they've been pretty good away from home against the spread thus far this season. But Auburn, as we talk about a lot, a terrific team against the spread when at home, especially when favored at home. The numbers there are simply overwhelming. It's a little bit of a bounce-back game from Auburn after losing at Texas A&M a week ago. Does Auburn get back to its comfortable confines there at Jordan-Hare Stadium? You have an edge here when it comes to the Bulldogs and the Tigers?
I think you hit it right on the head because, Mississippi State, although they're 5-4, have played really well on the road. They're 4-0 in their last 4 games as a road underdog, 5-1 against the spread in their last 6 games. They also play well in November, 5-1 against the spread in the month of November. So this is a team that, in reality and against the spread, is playing better than they have been, especially earlier this season. That said, and as we've talked about in previous weeks, going to Jordan-Hare Stadium is a whole different deal. Whether it's at noon or at 7 o'clock, this is a noon game. Auburn plays well at home. They're 5-1 their last 6 against the spread as a home favorite. Also, the favorite is 4-1 against the spread in the last 5 of this series. I like Auburn giving 5.5 in this one. Mike Leach's team still has a lot of holes in it. There's a lot of a lot of questions that have yet to be answered. Auburn, on the other hand, I think bounces back well in this game and covers and wins as well.
Marquee game in the SEC on Saturday is probably Ole Miss hosting Texas A&M, and I think the A&M part of this is pretty fascinating because this is a team at the beginning of the season seemed like a disappointment compared to preseason expectations, but also was dealing with a starting quarterback injury. Haynes King wasn't available. Well, you saw a couple early losses for the Aggies, Mississippi State, Arkansas, and that kind of made you feel like A&M might be heading towards a disappointing season, yet lo and behold, they played much better as of late. Obviously, the marquee win against Alabama, but I also have them covering the last 4 straight against SEC opponents and in 6 of the last 8. David, to me, this feels like an A&M team that's kind of turned the corner and under Jimbo Fisher has established kind of an expected level of play. I think this is an upper-tier team in the SEC and the kind of team I would trust going on the road. You can't say that about the entirety of the league, even some of the more talented teams on a week-to-week basis. You just don't quite know what you're going to get. But I'm starting to feel like I do know what I'm going to get from Texas A&M. I would actually feel pretty good about them in this spot against Ole Miss, home field advantage for what it's worth against the Rebels. I kind of like Texas A&M here on Saturday.
I really do too, and this is a team that looks so much different than they did, just struggling to get first downs against Colorado early in the year. And you touched on, or you hit it right on the head. Having a starting quarterback go down, it really took them a while to find their way. This is a completely different team than what we saw in August and September. A team that is really dangerous. This is an SEC West kind of de facto playoff game. To get into the driver's seat at the number 2 spot, hoping that Alabama can fall a little bit along the way. If Texas A&M can win, they'd certainly be in that kind of spot to be there. As a 2.5-point favorite, I like them straight up. Obviously, I like them at 2.5. I would probably like them at 5 at this point. Not that Ole Miss is bad, but it's just A&M just feels so good right now, and Lane Kiffin's team has the ability to just lay an egg. Now, will they lay one Saturday night at Vaught Hemingway? Probably not. But I think A&M is just so good right now. They've got a lot of things going their way, a lot of positive momentum. They're 8-2 in their last 10 on grass too, by the way.
Yeah.
Although they've changed that surface over there a little bit over the years to where this is one of those things where I feel like the favorite is 4-1 in the last 5 there. I got to go with the favorite. I got to go with a team that's a little hotter hand, and that means A&M covering easily the 2.5 on Saturday night.
So David, good enough to tell us what he's going for, but here's the thing we all need to go for. Big opportunity from BetUS. When you sign up for an account for the first time, use the promo code SEC125. You're going to get that 125% sign-up bonus. As I said to you before, that means that when you first sign up, BetUS is going to put more money into your account than you're going to put in there. You're literally going to be a winner before you even place your first bet. The SEC promo code here is SEC125. The website's BetUS.com. It's America's most beloved sports book. You don't get to be that way unless you're taking care of players. That's what BetUS has been doing for more than 25 years. They'll take care of you there as well. BetUS.com, promo code SEC125. Take advantage of that today for the 125% bonus on your initial deposit. David, best of luck with your own picks here this weekend. We'll certainly be rooting for ours, and we'll look forward to talking to you again very soon about some more edges here with some of these big games as we roll through the month of November.
BA, I always love talking football with you guys, and obviously it's a huge deal at BetUS. This is the best time of year, even with basketball season started.
That's right.
It's still football season, baby, until January. Let's win big this weekend.
Sounds good, Dave. We'll talk to you soon. So good stuff there, David Wasson from BetUS. That's a fun thing to consider, and also make sure you take advantage of that promo code SEC125 at BetUS.com. All right, we'll get your comments here coming up in just a moment. I know we've kind of gone a while here without getting some of those, but I promise they are on the way. I do want to kind of dive into some of the things I talked about before because One of the things that I think we see taking place in college football right now is an opportunity, and potentially an opportunity the SEC teams themselves could take advantage of, that would not exist in normal years. Now, you can hear my words on this. You might believe me, but I actually want to give you a chance to hear from Kirk Herbstreit on this there as well. Herbstreit was on the ESPN College Football Podcast earlier this week, and Herbstreit, looking around as we all are right now, hey, it's November. What's happening in college football? What's the sport look like here right now? And one of the things that Herbstreit noticed, or maybe the thing that Herbstreit's not noticing right now, that I think creates an opportunity here in the SEC, this is worth considering. Listen to Herbstreit's current assessment of where the Heisman Trophy might stand here this late in the season. I find this to be kind of an interesting assessment of how 2021 is actually quite different than most years might be. Herbstreit on this topic.
Take any player in the country right now, put them in 2012, 2015, 2016. Like, who would be a Heisman candidate? We're late in the year now. We got 4 weeks of football left to be played. Usually there's somebody's emerged. I keep saying that Caleb Williams, because how dynamic he is, and because he hasn't done anything yet against a big team except Texas. It was a big stage, even though Texas isn't a great team. But he has, like, Heisman moments feel to his playmaking ability. And I think on a stage like Baylor, Iowa State, Oklahoma State in a Big 12 championship, he's going to be afforded to maybe start to climb up. But right now, dude, Matt Corral, Kenneth Walker, C.J. Stroud, Bryce Young, Sam Howell, like
Jordan Davis. I mean, you could
name anybody that was a guy. They really don't have a campaign going right now.
So that's very interesting to hear Kirk Herbstreit say, hey, we're into the month of November and you don't really see a campaign taking place for anyone. He doesn't mean like a political campaign in terms of the school pushing a player for the Heisman. He means in terms of the kind of groundswell, grassroots support that can emerge when someone's playing so well they're thrusted obviously into the forefront of the Heisman conversation. Kirk Herbstreit says this week that we're in November. That still hasn't happened. Now, one of the guys you see on your screens, Jordan Davis from Georgia. You heard Matt Barry, the ESPN personality and commentator, kind of join in with Herbstreit a moment ago to mention Davis by name. And I think this is the point we're kind of getting to here, is that because as of yet we haven't had the quarterback really do that. Like, for instance, Bryce Young from Alabama is having a great year, but really no one views him as the forerunner for the Heisman Trophy. He's just not having that kind of season. Matt Corral at one point in time got that conversation, but as we predicted, Ole Miss was going to lose too many games to take Corral all that seriously as a Heisman candidate. I'd say the same thing about C.J. Stroud right now, or some of the other names you could potentially mention. There's just not a quarterback really stepping to the forefront in this conversation right now. Which, if that's true, and you can say, Kenneth Walker, obviously for the Michigan State running back, you saw Michigan State lose this past Saturday, so that's a little bit of an issue there as well. So in a year like this, where you don't have the obvious offensive star, typically quarterbacks or some sort of playmaker on the offensive side of the ball, since you don't have that this year the way that you would have in the past, then isn't it more of an opportunity, more of a possibility that a defensive player could step into that conversation? Because after all the Heisman Trophy really says it's supposed to be is for the best player in college football. It's not best quarterback award. It's not best running back award. It's for best player in college football. The fact that in most years we don't get more consideration for defensive players is probably an error as it is. And you understand the way that public perception kind of impacts all of this. Get all of that. But in a year in which there isn't public perception lining up behind any of the typical candidates, so much so that you heard Herbstreit a moment ago say a guy like Caleb Williams, the quarterback from Oklahoma, who wasn't even the starting quarterback for his team at the beginning of the season. In a year where it's that unorthodox and that unusual, is there a possibility that maybe a defensive player could be more a part of that conversation this year? In fact, go beyond just being a part of the conversation, actually win the award? Well, it's kind of funny. This week, Georgia coach Kirby Smart was asked about his guy who could be in that discussion, Jordan Davis. The stats aren't amazing. He's not even on the field for every defensive snap. He's the interior defensive tackle who's kind of a one-man run-stopping machine. But even in the absence of the stats and even in the absence of the data, there is still a lot to argue for on behalf of Davis. And Georgia coach Kirby Smart kind of alluded to that some this week. This is what Kirby had to say.
I love Jordan, and what he's done for our defense is incredible. I don't think you can measure in the statistics what he's done for our defense, but I'm no analyst to be deciding who gets to go for the Heisman and who's up for it. I think that's, the media and the talking heads and everybody that gets to be a part of that. They've kind of controlled the narrative there. For me, it's about our team and our team playing well, and Jordan's been a tremendous part of that, and he's been a bigger bonus to our defense from a confidence standpoint and a run stopping standpoint than probably any other measurable stat that we have there defensively.
So you hear a lot from Kirby Smart, but there's one thing you don't hear him say. There's one thing in that comment that you won't hear him say, which is that, no, I don't think that Jordan Davis should be a part of this conversation. That's silly. Kirby Smart's without openly campaigning, because that's not what Smart's going to do. Without openly campaigning, it's fairly obvious that Kirby Smart doesn't mind this discussion taking place around his team. He doesn't mind this conversation occurring right now. He's kind of okay with that. And, in fact, and admittedly, I've been part of kind of the effort to push Davis for this award. I'll certainly acknowledge that. But with this kind of rolling down the hill a little bit and potentially snowballing some from Davis, now you also see a similar level of chatter going on in Alabama. I'll show you this recent edit from 24/7 Sports on social media. The reporter here is Charlie Potter talking to Henry To'oTo'o, the Alabama linebacker, on the subject of Will Anderson. Now, listen, I think Anderson's a sensational player. And you've got To'oTo'o also arguing that much the same way Jordan Davis is potentially part of this Heisman discussion, that maybe To'oTo'o says that Will Anderson should be as well. He says, you guys see it every single Saturday. Will's all over the place, making plays. I think Will should be up there for the Heisman. I really do. So it's Anderson from Alabama. It's Jordan Davis from Georgia. It's defensive guys in the Heisman conversation right now. I believe it's appropriate for this to be true every year. It's a little easier to make it happen this year, just simply on the basis of no one else really stepping up to steal that mantle away for themselves. Now, admittedly, if you ask me, do I favor Davis? Do I favor Anderson? I think the argument here is for Davis, even though the individual stats for Anderson are better. The fact of the matter is the Georgia defense has just been far and away the best defense in the country. They're only averaging 6.6 points per game allowed thus far this year. Honoring a defense that's been that stingy all season long just seems to make some sense, and Davis would be the guy that I'd give that nod to there in that direction. But whether it's Davis or Anderson or whomever else, including defensive players in the Heisman discussion always makes sense, and this year it's probably a little easier to be able to do just that. All right, let's roll through here and get a few of your comments on Facebook and YouTube. Then we've got more news around the SEC to get for you after that. Kyle Cummings says, and UGA is leading in team sacks. Yeah, obviously Anderson's got the individual numbers, but clearly what Georgia's done from a team standpoint has been tremendous. And the way in which Jordan Davis occupies those blocks when he's on the field has obviously made all that so much easier. The argument for Davis has always kind of been that he stands as a representative for the entirety of the Georgia defense. He's not even head and shoulders the best player on the defense, but he is probably clearly the most dominant because of his size, and he's also the guy that probably best represents what's been so great about Georgia's defense all season long. But obviously Alabama fans are going to make their case there as well. Christopher White joins in the fun saying, typical Bama copying UGA. First it was the LED lights. Now they're trying to get their best defensive player in the Heisman conversation. He says, typical Bama. This is kind of a funny back and forth that Georgia fans and Alabama fans have had over the years. And so Christopher's obviously having some fun right there. And you love to be able to see that. That's good stuff. All right, got a few more comments here. Jeremy Pettis, Kevin Cook going back and forth here in the comment section. You kind of always love to see that. Pettis also arguing for Will Anderson. You can understand why he would. He's a terrific player. No question about that. Rick Godby says, we'll get beat, but I don't think Georgia's going to cover. So Rick Godby in here arguing for Tennessee plus the points on Saturday. I do think Saturday's a little bit of a dangerous spot for Georgia if you bring the point spread into the discussion. This is a more challenging offense than Georgia's seen all season long. And I've had smart people who talk to SEC head coaches on a regular basis. I've had them tell me that this is going back, beginning of the season, that the team maybe on Georgia's schedule in the regular season most likely to threaten UGA may have been Tennessee. More so at the time than Auburn, more so at the time maybe than Florida, that it was really a Tennessee team because while this is not a full, complete roster as of yet, it is certainly the full vision of what Heupel wants on that side of the ball. No one plays faster, and with Hendon Hooker at quarterback, that speed with which they're playing is also working out to great success there as well. So could I see this game close for 4 quarters on Saturday? Yeah, I kind of could. Corey Tester takes it another step and said, BA, the Vols going to pull the upset against Georgia on Saturday. Obviously, I wouldn't expect anything different from Corey, and I'm glad to have him weighing in on that. And we will see. We will see about that. Ultimately, I think that Georgia wins, but I do expect loud stadium on Saturday and getting a little bit of challenge. Maurice Long checks in to say, I can definitely see Texas A&M representing the SEC West in the SEC championship game. He says Bama loses another game. Yeah, folks, don't forget about this. If Alabama were to lose to Auburn at the end of the season, by virtue of the tiebreaker, A&M would be on its way to the SEC championship. So we are not done with the race in the SEC West, and that's a very important thing to keep in mind. Something else to keep in mind, my friends at Meriwether and Tharp, they're your source for Georgia divorce, but they're a resource for folks living all throughout SEC country. Carolinas, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, into Texas, and really all across our fruited plain here. Whatever questions you have about divorce, Meriwether and Tharp can provide those answers for you. I'm talking about with free resources and blog posts, podcasts, and a chance for an initial consultation with one of the Meriwether and Tharp attorneys to help walk you through the divorce process. Obviously, your situation is specific. You've got circumstances that might be unique to you, but Meriwether and Tharp understands the intricacies of the law and how the law impacts you no matter what your own personal story is. So the specific questions you have can be answered by Meriwether and Tharp. They can tell you if divorce really does make sense for you, if maybe some other option might be the direction you want to go with all of that. They'll listen to your story, and not only are they smart, they understand the law, but they also have the kind of emotional intelligence to understand how it feels to be going through all of this. That's the kind of institutional knowledge that you earn when you do this thousands of times before. That's what Meriwether and Tharp has done. So the website's theatlantadivorceteam.com. That's the website. But you don't have to be in Atlanta to take advantage of that. Wherever you are around SEC country, or wherever you happen to be watching our video here today, you can check out my friends at Meriwether and Tharp and get your questions about the divorce process answered today, and maybe make the decision to put one of their attorneys to work for you, helping you deal with your own personal divorce situation. That's the right choice, Meriwether and Tharp. So find them today online, theatlantadivorceteam.com. Of course, Atlanta, the kind of epicenter of all the action here in the SEC, but you don't have to be in Atlanta to take advantage of all the great things that Meriwether and Tharp can do for you. So make sure you check them out there today. By the way, speaking of our commenter a moment ago who brought up Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M, let's keep the conversation going there for a moment, because I did think it was interesting last night when you look at the College Football Playoff Selection Committee's top 25 from yesterday, where A&M sits in all of this right now. And I think it's very, very quiet at the moment, but at least keep your eye on this. So there wasn't very much movement at all yesterday related to the top 25, because for the most part, the teams that were rated highly, they won games on Saturday, but they didn't do it very much in impressive fashion. Bama stayed at 2. Oregon jumped up to 3. Ohio State now at 4. You saw Cincinnati move up a spot. The big controversy was Michigan being ahead of Michigan State, despite the fact that Michigan State had won a couple of weeks ago there. That'll sort itself out. Still got Oklahoma at 8. Notre Dame kind of quietly sneaking around that chicken coop there at 9. And then lo and behold, look at number 11. You got Texas A&M. Now, on the one hand, the College Football Playoff Selection Committee has never taken a 2-loss team before. A&M's 2 losses aren't particularly strong. Arkansas and Mississippi State don't exactly argue for inclusion in the college football playoff. But those of us who follow the SEC also know there were mitigating factors there. The injury to Haynes King at the start of the season seemingly debilitated the Aggies, and yet in the aftermath of that injury, it appears that Jimbo Fisher has really settled in with Zach Calzada. And suddenly, and you heard David Watson from BetUS saying this a moment ago, suddenly A&M's actually playing some pretty good football. Handling business at home last week against Auburn, at one point in time, that wasn't a given, and yet on Saturday it was certainly came to pass. Not great offensively in the first half, but a strong win by the time it's all said and done. Going into Ole Miss there on Saturday as well, with a chance to do on the road what it just did a week ago at home. So here's my question for you. What if A&M gets the luck that it needs? Of course, it has to keep winning. But what if it gets the upset from Auburn in the Iron Bowl at the end of the season? What if A&M goes to the SEC championship? Now, there is a thought out there, well, even if A&M were to pull the upset and beat Georgia, Georgia would still go to the college football playoff as a one-loss team, that Georgia's already done enough to get there. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Let's put Georgia aside for a moment. an A&M upset would be the strangest thing that's ever happened in college football. What if they did pull that upset? Is there still a chance that a Texas A&M team that at one point in time had 2 losses and left for dead, they are at least active and alive in the college football playoff conversation? Now, to be clear, if A&M does play Georgia and Atlanta, I think that Georgia wins, and I think that Georgia probably wins that game convincingly. So the A&M case could end because of a loss to Georgia. Most likely it would. But it is interesting to note that there are more than 2 SEC teams, I believe, who are still part of the college football playoff conversation. Even with 2 losses, I think that Texas A&M is at least a part of this discussion. Now, they may be on the periphery of the discussion, and they may just barely be hanging on by a thread. The 2 bad losses are obviously an issue that's difficult to overcome. But the way they played in the recent weeks, including getting that big win against Alabama, I think makes them worth considering. And by the way, with all of this still potentially out in front of A&M, maybe most prominently a chance to still win the SEC West, Jimbo said this week that they're just trying to keep it, as coaches do, one game at a time, one play at a time, and not look too far into the future about what might be. This is Jimbo Fisher on that.
You got one thing to do. Worry about practice today and get better. The fundamentals of practice today, solely focus on Ole Miss. Play one day. You got 3 one-game seasons. When you get to November and you're relevant, it's a playoff. So you forget about everything else. 1 week at a time, 1 day at a time, 1 practice at a time, 1 play at a time. And that's that simple.
I think that Jimbo Fisher uses a pretty interesting word there. He says relevant. I think that's probably the best way to kind of sum all this up. As it stands right now, there is no doubt that Texas A&M is still a relevant part of the national conversation. They were 11th in the playoff top 25 last night, and they could be climbing a lot higher before the season's all said and done. Let's turn our attention now to Gainesville, Florida, and the aftermath of what happened for the Gators in an embarrassing loss to South Carolina this past week. Obviously, you know that Dan Mullen, who has faced a lot of heat and criticism, and justifiably so, in the midst of a 5-loss campaign that could still be getting worse. But ultimately, that was the kind of criticism that deserved a response and required a response. And the response came from Florida here this week as Todd Grantham is out. John Hevesy, the offensive line coach, out there as well. And we'll see what that does to quiet the firestorm that kind of exists around Dan Mullen right now. For a lot of Florida fans, their assistant coaches weren't very popular to begin with. I think it was treated with confusion why Grantham was even brought back for 2021. But guys like Hevesy, also for their lack of big-time recruiting wins, they're just the kind of guys that I think the average Florida fan has disliked more than maybe some in the national media have kind of realized. It's one of the reasons why you have to have a show like SEC Country Live, a show that's immersed in SEC country and, frankly, SEC culture, to understand that Florida fans haven't been as happy with their own team as the national media has assumed for quite some time. Even last year when Florida won the SEC East and Dan Mullen was heaped praise upon him for being the best play caller in college football, all the stuff that goes along there. Fact of the matter is there are a lot of Gators fans who expected more from that season and were disappointed with the talent deficiencies that led to what ultimately turned out to be a 4-loss campaign. So this is not new ground for Florida fans to tread upon, but the immediate aftermath of this means trying to pick the pieces up and put them back together. In fact, one of the most favored sons in Gainesville, Florida, former national championship coach, Heisman Trophy winner, the most recognizable figure around the program, former coach Steve Spurrier made a radio appearance in the Gainesville area this past week, and he really laid it out in no uncertain terms exactly what he thought this Florida loss meant for the Gators in Columbia this past week. And let me show you this on the screen. So Spurrier goes on ESPN Gainesville, that's a radio station there in the Gainesville area, and says that performance at South Carolina was, and here's the word, embarrassing. We all know that. I don't think anybody would dispute that. Of course, Mike Gillespie, the TV reporter, gives that to you. Of course, he's giving that to some folks there in the state of South Carolina, so maybe South Carolina fans didn't like hearing it was embarrassing, but it is embarrassing. Florida was a huge favorite on the road. They got completely, as we'd say when I was growing up, blowed out in that game. They got completely manhandled and destroyed by South Carolina, playing a FCS transfer at quarterback, like from St. Francis or somewhere like that. It was embarrassing all the way around. And good for Spurrier, if you're a Florida fan, for stepping up and calling it what it is. Of course that's embarrassing. And what might be embarrassing even more is some of the stuff that comes to the forefront in the aftermath of all of this. That Anthony Richardson, the quarterback, who did not play in the game, and later on we find out that Anthony Richardson dealt with an injury, and then we find out that Richardson's injury was caused by a dance routine that he was doing in the hotel before the game there on Friday. I mean, if you're a Florida fan, you can't hardly help but do just the whole like palm on the forehead about the whole deal there. And then Richardson goes on Twitter and appeared to make light of the whole thing. Do we have this video? Can we show the Anthony Richardson video of him kind of explaining the dance that he was doing that led to the injury? Now, first of all, when you see this, I mean, how do you not hurt your knee doing this? I mean, this is actually the torque that puts on a knee is pretty wild. But Richardson says on Twitter, for context, this is the dance that I was doing that led to the injury. And it's hard to know what's in a young man's mind. And the one thing I'm not going to do is drag a player through the coals too much. I mean, I'll, certainly take my jabs at coaches because they get paid millions. The players less than that, I'm certainly not going to make as big a deal about them. But don't you want to hear something different from your quarterback who could have contributed to the game had he been able to play? Don't you want to hear a little contrition maybe in his voice about the injury that he suffered because he's dancing around the hotel? It kind of reminds me of the thing that Bo Davis, the former Alabama assistant now at Texas, was caught on mic saying in the bus leaving the game after getting beat by Iowa State the other day, basically just challenging the players to care. I mean, there's a degree to which with Anthony Richardson, it almost, this tweet comes across like, do you really care about this as much as you're supposed to? And for Florida, the embarrassment of the loss to South Carolina extends with all that there as well. That there is just a level of buy-in you're not quite sure you're getting from Dan Mullen at the moment. We talked about this on last week's show with what was written by Bruce Feldman at The Athletic, what others have written about, Brandon Marcello, 24/7 Sports, other national voices who've really shined the spotlight on what Mullen's either allowing at Florida or accidentally encouraging. How you do anything's how you do everything. And Dan Mullen tolerated a team that quit during its bowl game a year ago. Mullen's response at the end of all that was to basically just shrug it off. Well, once you allow that to seep into a program, you can't get it out. It's like a dead animal stench in a car. I mean, good luck trying to fumigate that once it's all said and done. And there is clearly an attitude at Florida right now that needs fumigating. There's clearly an eradication that's got to take place because not only did Florida suffer what Steve Spurrier called an embarrassing loss, but sort of did so in a way that kind of, the same kind of shrug that Dan Mullen gave at the bowl loss to Oklahoma. There's also a little bit of a shrug there from some Florida players about what happened in Columbia. And clearly Florida fans themselves have a higher standard than that. Clearly the Florida fans themselves know there's a whole lot more that should be expected of Florida than that. But do the players know that? And if they don't, isn't it the responsibility of Dan Mullen to help explain that and help? He talks all the time about the Gator standard, but is he really demonstrating what the Gator standard's supposed to be? I think it's fair to wonder if he is or if he isn't. Now, I still expect Mullen to be back at Florida in 2022. I think the heads that he put on the chopping block this week may have given him a little bit of cover. But it's also one of those things where you wonder if what wasn't done immediately will have to be done eventually. In other words, is there some signs of erosion around Mullen that simply can't be fixed, that simply can't be corrected? I think a lot of folks around Gainesville are wondering that very thing right now. Let me pop in here, get a couple comments on YouTube. G. Grace getting ready to check out. He says, later, guys and gals. G. Grace, we always appreciate you stopping by. Mark Morris says there's no turning back from the debacle at Florida, that Strickland will eventually send him packing. This is kind of an interesting rumor mill type thing coming out of this in Gainesville, that maybe there was, at least according to some reports, and there's some fairly well-established voices who've signal boosted this rumor, that maybe there was a little bit of an exchange, possibly even a heated exchange between Scott Strickland, the Florida athletic director, and Mullen in Gainesville last week, or I should say in Columbia last Saturday after that loss, where the appearance is that Strickland understands that as Florida tries to get more aggressive in the SEC spending wars on facilities and things like that, you're having to massage more boosters to get that done. Boosters will then have a high expectation of what takes place on the field, and Strickland would appear to be, at least from my vantage point, trying to distance himself from Mullen, making himself seem like more than the AD who came over from Mississippi State, who brought his buddy with him. It seems like right now Scott Strickland is in a little bit of an audition to prove that he can be his own man, and eventually making a move against Mullen may be the way that he proves that fully and completely. G. Greg Spammerboy also giving you the Mr. Anderson NYC, trying to jump in on the hashtag that we've started around here on Dog Nation for hashtag JD to NYC. Rohawk checks in to say Dogs 38, Tennessee 13 on Saturday. So that's a Georgia fan feeling pretty good about all of this. Tennille Calvino in here having a good time there as well. So you love to see the great comments rolling in on the YouTube side of things all night long here on SEC Country Live. We appreciate that. Let me also give you a couple more things in our show there as well, including, speaking of the Florida loss to South Carolina, the Gamecocks had a pretty funny way of celebrating that. We'll talk about that before it's done here. But on the other side of that for a moment, how about Shane Beamer? Suddenly kind of riding a little high there at South Carolina. You know, all of the SEC first-year coaches, I guess with the exception of Clark Lee, have all had their various moments. You know, for Brian Harsin at Auburn, it may have been the win against Ole Miss. For Tennessee, it maybe it was, you know, what happened last week against Kentucky. But all of the first-year SEC coaches have kind of had a little bit of a moment they could pat themselves in the back and feel pretty good about. And finally, Shane Beamer got one of those this past week against Florida. It was this kind of special win that even Beamer himself admitted they haven't really had up to this point in time in the season. And he also acknowledges that now the thing you got to be careful of is making sure this doesn't cause you to lose focus on what still can be accomplished the rest of the way for the Gamecocks. This is pretty introspective on the part of Shane Beamer about the mission that's still ongoing for South Carolina for the rest of the year. Take a listen to the Gamecocks coach on that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's and that is a challenge for us. There's no doubt about it. I mean, it's the first time that we've had some great wins, but a win like that, you know, it's certainly a little bit different for our guys, and we got to handle it the right way. And, you know, we talked about it on Sunday that the same people that are, you know, telling you how great you are and all that stuff are probably the same people that wanted you benched last week. You know, the same people that are telling myself or Marcus Satterfield how awesome it was, and we've been behind you since the get-go, are probably the same ones that were on the message boards last week ready to run us out of town. So, I mean, it is what it is. So we've made a big point about not listening to the outside talk when we were struggling, and let's not listen to the outside talk now either. And it's a challenge for us to take what we did on Saturday night and build on it and be even better because of it.
One of the things I kind of like from Beamer there is the acknowledgement that not all wins are created equal. There's obviously a temptation on the part of coaches to treat everything as, oh, yeah, it's just one game at a time, and, you know, every game is equally important. In the SEC, every game is big. But obviously when you beat a team like Florida that won the East a year ago and that has the historic cachet of multiple national championships, for a team like South Carolina, that's obviously crucial. And clearly Beamer wants to try to keep that momentum going as long as he can. Frankly, I think they could be in a little bit of trouble at Missouri on Saturday just because it's hard to leave the friendly confines of your home stadium and go on the road and replicate the same level of play. But even if that doesn't happen, for a South Carolina program that was really kind of starting from scratch with Beamer and big needs to fill a lot of talent gaps in the program that just kind of happen in the age of the transfer portal. Once coach gets fired, guy's going to leave the program, and you got to try to fill some of those roster spots to be able to give your fan base any moment to be happy about it. And as it stands right now, South Carolina's got a better record than Florida does. So from that standpoint, you can say, hey, right now we're outpacing the team that won this division a year ago. That's the kind of thing that Beamer can sell. And even if the Gamecocks veer back in the direction of losing before the season's done, I believe they will. But even if that does happen, you still got something you can sell here going forward. So I don't think you can discount what happened for the Gamecocks on Saturday night against the Florida Gators. Another story here on SEC Country Live I want to make sure I make your attention, make sure it gets your attention, make you aware of. We actually talked about this last week, and it's still not going away. That idea is out there that Jimbo Fisher, who we talked about before, doing big things right now at Texas A&M, is still a potential candidate at LSU there as well. LSU's obviously looking for a replacement for Ed Orgeron. By the way, LSU played pretty tough last week against Alabama, but Orgeron's gone at the end of the season no matter what. And I want to show you this on the screen here from 24/7 Sports, talking about the idea that LSU still covets Jimbo Fisher, and basically, going so far in that article as to say that they're not going to go out without a fight. They're going to keep the fight going. We know from Jimbo Fisher over the years, he obviously loved his time at Baton Rouge, has deep affection for the city, for the university there as well. He's friends with Scott Woodward, the LSU AD, who also hired him there at Texas A&M. This is one worth watching for as good as things are in College Station right now. And my belief is, as of this moment, at least for the moment, A&M's probably a little bit better job than LSU, although LSU is probably one of the 10 best jobs in the entire country. But even with everything that Jimbo potentially has going for him there in College Station, there's a lot of reports that still exist out there that give you the thought that, you know what, maybe Jimbo Fisher really still will consider that LSU job, and certainly LSU is not done trying to push him for that. So who knows? Maybe we'll get some more of that before it's all said and done. We'll do an SEC LOL in a moment. That's also South Carolina themed, and it's funny. Before that, though, let me squeeze in a couple more comments on Facebook before we do. Keith Bradshaw checks in to say, go Dogs. Appreciate that. Kyle Cummings checks in to say, hashtag JD to NYC, touting Jordan Davis to the Heisman Trophy. Also gives you the hashtag beat everybody, which was a callback to a Kirby Smart comment from a little earlier this season. Kevin Zeminski giving you a go Gators. So I love the fact that SEC fans don't give up on their team even when things aren't going well. Kevin's still feeling good about the Gators, even though Georgia is obviously on top in the SEC East, and Florida is obviously kind of falling on hard times. Florida fans not giving up their own team, and boy, I think you'd love to see that. Michael Cooper having some fun in here. Good to see Michael Cooper in here having some fun. Appreciate that. Kevin Cook taking some jabs at Alabama fans. That's going to happen a lot in this comment section there as well. Edwina Atwood kind of going back and forth with some SEC fans. She's a Georgia fan saying, why do y'all live in the past? Georgia's the future, so obviously having fun there. Ronnie Spicer checks in to say, fire Eli Drinkwitz at Missouri. So Drinkwitz facing some heat, 43-6 losers against Georgia last week, and Ronnie Spicer says he's seen enough there when it comes to Drinkwitz. We'll see if Drinkwitz can get a win for his program against South Carolina on Saturday. Maybe that'll slow some of that kind of stuff down there. Homer Hamby says sooner or later dog fans are going to be right. Been saying that for 4 years, so Homer's in here having a good time. Donald Rumney checks in here to say, man, week after week, you can't stop yapping about them dogs. Won't be long now. So Donald's having a good time. Good to see that. Good comments all the way around. Appreciate that. We love this comment section on both Facebook and YouTube for the fun of going back and forth and the jabbing and the sniping back and forth. That's always a great thing to be able to see. Something else we also love to be able to do for you is to end each show on a little bit of a lighthearted note. Obviously, it's our SEC LOL, and I thought that South Carolina, who has one of the underrated video departments in the SEC as it is, on the basis of a Josh Vann touchdown against Florida that was wide open the other day. We'll show you the video. The South Carolina video crew kind of making fun of all the things that Vann could have done and the time it took a Florida defender to even get anywhere near him in the end zone. I like the caption on this saying, so much room for activities. And then you see Van's going to play a little golf. He's going to order some food. This is really kind of putting it out there for South Carolina, really taking a nap there in the end zone. Very funny. There was a time in which this would have not been appropriate really at all. But in the age we live in now, these social media accounts have taken on personalities, and they go back and forth with each other much the same way fans go back and forth with each other too, much the same way our comments are in the comment section each and every time there as well. So bringing in Josh Vann, letting him kind of add to the fun of a big touchdown against Florida and using that on social media. Pretty good job there by South Carolina. We'll make that our SEC LOL here for today. And it's, by the way, it's still rolling on there. Really funny stuff. Good job by South Carolina. And I think it's an entertaining age in which we live, which these teams are being so creative on social media like that. So I think that's a pretty good thing to be able to see. Thanks for being here on SEC Country Live today. Enjoy the SEC action this upcoming weekend. We'll see you back here on the program again next Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern Time for SEC Country Live. We'll look forward to talking to you then.